It's time for Where You Live with Gene and Tony, the show that's all about owning, buying, selling, renting, and association management. If it involves a home, we'll talk about it. Here's your chance to get your homeowner questions answered. From the Concierge Landscape Studios, here's Gene and Tony.
Needed the shelter of someone's arms, and there you were. Needed someone to understand my ups and downs.
Welcome back to Hour 2 of Where You Live with Gene and Tony. I'm Gene Sullivan.
I'm Tony Crockett.
And folks, if you're just joining us, we're broadcasting from the Concierge Landscape Studios. We're brought to you this second hour by Extreme Exteriors as well. And we were wrapping up the last hour with an interesting case. There's an individual who was upset because his homeowner association, he felt, was not being consistent in enforcing and making sure that all of the rules and regulations were being upheld by all homeowners. And he felt such a great injustice. He took him to court saying, "Court, surely you've got to make them comply.
You have to make the homeowners association board enforce all rules again for all members."
Yeah.
That doesn't sound unreasonable.
No, it doesn't. What it presumes, though, Tony, is the idea that the association has more actual authority than they do. I can't. That's the one thing that is difficult for people to understand. We understand that in property management, many times we use other vendors, other contractors, and ask them to do the bidding of the owner or owners of the property that we're managing. And we will say to them, you need to be on the property on this time. Mm-hmm. And if they choose not to, we can't grab them by the scuff of the neck, by their collar, and drag them there, because there's only so much that we can do.
Well, and in this
same thing with the association.
In this particular association, their covenants actually said that the board had the discretion as to whether or not to take legal action to enforce rules and regulations. And I understand that too, because it gives the homeowners association board more discretion and more wiggle room if they need it, depending on the circumstance. Now, I had an experience with a homeowners association. It was about 10 years old when I managed it, and the developer who built it had drafted some rules and regulations that were included in the governing documents. So they were the law.
This goes way beyond, folks, for those listening, there is a hierarchy of importance with what is considered the documents of the association,
right?
And you've got the declaration, which in
articles of incorporation are the highest in the hierarchy,
and you have
declaration.
You have bylaws, and then you have rules and regulations. Rules and regulations are generally left up to the board of directors because the developer says we're going to allow the homeowners to choose among themselves people to lead and to be able to make your decisions on what you want to do.
But in this case, the developer actually had in the governing documents a size limit for dogs in the association. You could not have a dog over 35 pounds. The problem started when their real estate sales team proceeded to sell these homes to anyone and everyone with any size dog.
And disregard that part of it.
They didn't enforce this rule. So subsequent sales or resales down the road, people moved into the association. They've been told you could not have a dog over 35 pounds. And they look across the street and here's a Great Dane that lives over there. Or here's a German Shepherd that lives over there. And we had one couple in particular that were very upset about that. And they said this Great Dane is tearing up the lawn. It's causing damage. And it is in violation of the governing documents.
That's not a Great Dane. That's a Clydesdale.
That's a Clydesdale. And unfortunately, the board said, you're right. It is in violation of the rules and regulations. However, this person's lived here for 5 years with this Great Dane, and they were allowed to purchase and move in here with the Great Dane. So what do we do with this issue? If our state said the board is required to go to any extreme to enforce the rules and regulations, you have to take legal action, that board maybe would have ended up in court trying to evict a homeowner who had lived in their home for
Yeah.
5 or 6 years simply because she'd been misled at the time she purchased.
That is what I think is implied in this court case with
That's
this
right.
homeowner who said, and this is the case, Robert Heath versus the Bear Island Homeowners Association. The implication here was the association must, at any and all costs, enforce.
Right.
That's what he's thinking is fair. And although there is truth in that it is fair,
Is it right?
is it not right? Of course, it's right, but is it wise?
Okay.
Right,
or practical, or
practical.
yeah,
Exactly.
in the long run. You mentioned when we were discussing the story that there's sometimes circumstances where a violation will resolve itself if
Yes.
given time. And you cited a landlord who owns a townhome who has a renter in there that's causing problems
Mm-hmm.
for the homeowners association. Now, the homeowners association could take legal action and try and force the issue, but if the landlord says, you know what, I know they're a problem.
Yeah.
They have 2 months left on their lease, and I've given them notice to vacate at the end of their lease,
Yeah.
which, by the way, is the easiest way to get rid of bad renters. You give them notice to vacate at the end of their lease. Then it would make sense for the association to say, you know what, we're gonna grit our teeth, we're gonna
And-
bide our time. These people will be gone.
And at that point, I think it is wise for people that are on a board of directors to make sure that they communicate that well with others.
Yes, there you go.
I think that piece doesn't get communicated, and so people get the idea, as was in the case of this court case with this Mr. Heath, the association must be doing nothing.
They're not doing anything,
because
yeah.
it's still there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if it is indeed, like you said, where you have a case where they've talked to the owner and the owner says, hey, I know these guys are bad apples.
Yeah.
I'm not renewing the
Yeah.
lease. Guess what? It's resolving itself in a month or so. Why spend
Right.
extra money
Right. Going to
and
court.
extra time
Right.
if it's going to be inevitable for them to be out?
Yeah.
The same thing would be true in rules and regulations. How many times have you had the association have specific rules that'll say in a condominium they can't be excessive with noise after a certain amount of time? And there's a person who's upset because that had happened, but the board takes a look at the case and, hey, look, it was this neighbor in this unit. Their son graduated from high school. Yes, there was a party. It lasted a little bit longer. But is this something that's happening on a regular basis? No. So, there
Right.
is it wrong if the association doesn't go all the way and say, this is going to mean a fine, this is going to mean... No, the association doesn't necessarily have to enforce something if it's a one-time event,
Right.
and clearly people understand that.
Right. That's true.
We had, I think that same thing happened with someone who had something on their fence posts. Remember when they weren't allowed to have a sign, and they had a sign on
Yeah.
because their son was coming home from
the military?
From the
or-
military.
Yeah, welcome home.
So
or
it was
whatever.
welcome home. It was there till he was there, and and there were some people that were upset. You've got to realize, okay, that's not right.
Right.
The board takes the step and says, you know what? Please don't do that again.
Right.
But I think it's certainly okay if the association says, you know what? We don't have to necessarily fine someone
Yeah.
each and every time. That's usually the product of
Having
someone who's
said all of
upset.
that, we're always relying on common sense, Gene. You know that. We even say that. Common sense should apply. But being in property management, we've also learned that often common sense does not come into play. So the association, as they're making these discretionary decisions, must realize and must be careful, because they may be accused of discrimination or of inequity, and you do have to comply with fair housing. So if you are making some decisions like this, let's make sure the minutes reflect the motion and the vote.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make sure there's some documentation as to why maybe the decision was made, and to try and protect your board.
And I think that is a very good point, that the other side of that, and I think that's the fine line that every board will probably tread on one time or another, and that is, yes, we want to enforce, we want to be consistent and fair, because that's what is right for everybody's concerns.
Yeah.
But you also realize that there are circumstances, and it doesn't make sense to necessarily do that. You have to be careful because, like you said, more and more people being as sensitive, hypersensitive as they are, could cry and say discrimination.
Yeah.
And then that would be just terrible, because then there's a whole nother set of issues
That's right.
You're dealing with. We have that situation now in one of the associations that we're managing, and as a matter of fact, it'll be one of the meetings that I'm going to be going to. The association went through and is enforcing their rules and their governing documents. But the person on the other end, the renter of this owner, is claiming discrimination. And so and soon as the claim is made, unfortunately, we live in a climate where you're guilty until proven innocent.
Sometimes,
almost in those cases. And so now the association reported that to insurance. Insurance is dealing with it, and an attorney's involved, and it's amplified so much more than it needed to be.
Yeah.
And so you just don't need to add to that by being inconsistent. So anyway, does the association have the ability to say, you know what, it's not wise for us to enforce or push something each and every time? The court in Florida said yes. That certainly seems to be the case. So we'd love to hear what you think about that, too. That could be something you could give us comment on. Our hotline being 952-224-2668. Let's take another break right now. When we come back, we're going to talk about something that was in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune this last week. An article saying condo associations feel the heat as fees rise and values sink. More after this.